Today is Sunday, June 2nd, and this is Celtics Beat on the CLNS Media Network, the leading online provider of audio-video coverage of the Boston Celtics. I'm Adam Kaufman, and episode 317 featuring longtime sporting news NBA insider Sean Deveney is brought to you by betonline.ag. Go to clnsmedia.com/CelticsBeat and use the promo code CLNS50 for a 50% bonus on your first deposit. Hard to believe, but June. It's already June, and there's going to be so much to talk about. There already is, as it concerns the NBA. Welcome into Celtics Beat. Adam Kaufman here with you, and we're just going to, as we've done over the last couple weeks, right? I mean, there was Kendrick Perkins, there was Gary Washburn. Last week, both Aaron Baines, Adam Himmelsbach. We've already taken a deep dive into a lot of the issues concerning the Celtics, questions facing the Celtics, some of the individual players, and this is actually a big month in terms of decision-making, because Kyrie Irving, Aaron Baines, they both have until June 13th to decide whether to opt in or hit free agency. Everybody knows Irving is going to opt out. My guess ultimately is that Baines will opt in, but we'll find out. He seemed to indicate that when he was on last week. Al Horford has till June 18th to make his decision on that $30 million option. I'm guessing, I've talked about this, I think he is going to negotiate a longer-term deal with a lower average annual value with the Celtics. So I don't think he's going to opt in on that, but time will tell. We can get into that in a little bit. Obviously, there are some other guys as well. Terry Rozier, Celtics have to decide whether to tender that $4.3 million qualifying offer. So there are a lot of things on Danny Ainge's plate as he continues to inch his way back into a full workload, and we've heard from a variety of people that he's healthy, he's doing well. We know he's up and around. He was at John Havlicek's memorial ceremony just recently, so that's all good. So it's going to be a busy time, and the NBA draft is coming later this month, and technically, it's no more Ask Me July 1st, Kyrie Irving. Technically, it's June 30th at 6 p.m. is when free agency is going to begin. That is a new change this year. So those among the things that are on the plate today, as well as a lot of your questions. Going to be kind of a mailbag type of show here. And without further ado, the guy who's going to join me for it, long of the sporting news, 2 decades there. Let's bring in Sean Deveney. How are you, Sean?
I'm doing well, Adam. How are you?
Good. It's great to have you. And, for people that are catching on, obviously, at the sporting news for a long, long time, as I mentioned, and I'm a big fan of your work. I know I'm not alone. You've been on both my radio shows, this podcast, on a regular basis for quite a long time as well. I'm very eager to see what it is that you wind up doing next as you transition and continue to cover the NBA, but I know it's going to be a lot of fun to watch.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it as well. A lot of possibilities out there, so had like you say, 2 decades in this business. That's a rare thing. So very grateful for that, and very eager to find what's next. But still going to be covering this off season, and still going to be fascinated by what goes down. I think this will be the most interesting off season we've had. Certainly since 2016. You could probably argue since 2010.
Yeah, I mean, you consider, and it's not just the Celtics, obviously. That's a big part of it, and there are dominoes there, most especially with Kyrie Irving, and will the C's go after Anthony Davis, and some of the things that we can go even deeper on, but it's also Kawhi Leonard in the NBA Finals right now. Is he going to move? Kevin Durant on the other side of that matchup, as he efforts to get healthy and be part of this series, is he going to move on? Klay Thompson, could he move on? There could be a lot of big-name guys, plus the Rockets, and we'll talk about them later. Daryl Morey's just looking to blow up that operation to try and turn them into a legitimate title contender, which they've been on the fringe of for the past several years, really since Harden arrived. So there are a lot of high-profile guys that could be on the move this summer.
Yeah, and like I say, you could go back to 2016 to when you had the level of interest, with Kevin Durant making his decision, and a bunch of teams. You had that spike in the cap, and I would compare it to that, except this time around, there's no Timothy Mozgov. There's no need to spend money on Bismack Biyombo. You've got a lot of players.
Or Evan Turner.
A lot of caps. Yeah, or Evan Turner for that matter. Right. So a lot of those bad contracts we saw given out in 2016, which were given out pretty much because teams had money and no one to spend it on. Now you've got teams that have money and they've got some players to spend it on. There's actually good players who are worth the contracts they're going to get. I think that's what makes this as interesting an offseason we've had since 2010, which of course is when LeBron and Chris Bosh went to Miami.
Well, normally what I tend to do is save Twitter questions for the end of the show when we end up having time to take them, except what I want to do here, a little bit different because of the off-season. I want to make sure we have time to take them. We're going to take them right off the top of the show. We've got a bunch of good ones that involve a lot of the issues that I otherwise would have discussed with you anyway, so why not let the listeners dictate the show here? So this first one, Sean, comes from Corey B08, and this is, you can go in a zillion different directions. In fact, this particular Twitter user kind of wants you to. The question is, what is the Celtics' plan A, B, and C this offseason?
Yeah, plan A remains to bring back this group and try to make a trade for Anthony Davis. I really think that's been Danny Ainge's plan for more than a year now. And I don't think anything has backed him off that. If you know Ainge, if you've followed him, if you've watched what he's done, when he kind of locks in on the player he wants or the team that he wants, especially superstars, he doesn't necessarily just give up. We saw that with Kevin Garnett and eventually with Kyrie Irving, and I think it's going to be the same way with Anthony Davis, where he's going to be willing to take that gamble on Anthony Davis and hope that he can bring back Kyrie Irving. Now there are people within the organization, and I'm sure you've heard this too, Adam, that would be fine letting Kyrie Irving walk and getting back to, hey, let's build around the young guys that we have. Let's build around Tatum and Jaylen Brown and keep Terry Rozier and let these guys develop together. Develop with Gordon Hayward, and that to me is probably Plan C. Just because I don't think that's what Danny wants to do. I think Danny does want to stay at a certain level in terms of where his superstars are. He's a big believer in having those elite players and not necessarily having a bunch of very good players. So I think that's probably Plan C. So the question becomes, all right, what's the middle ground there? What does Danny do if he strikes out with Kyrie Irving and Anthony Davis? Is there a move there that can be made? A Mike Conley trade or something like that. That I think is probably a long shot, but I think that's going to be Plan B. Is there a veteran who we don't have to commit to long term? You don't want to get in a situation where you've got a bad contract on your hands over a long period of time. But that's going to be probably the Plan B. Is okay if we strike out on Kyrie and Anthony Davis, let's find a trade that can upgrade us, that can get us a star player in here, and keep us as a legitimate contender.
Piggybacking on that Twitter question then, so and obviously going off of what you were saying with Plan A and that being bring back Kyrie and trade for Davis, if Kyrie goes, though, if he walks, is the effort still there? Is it still the same to trade for Davis and bring him in with this group without Irving?
Yeah, I can't really say for sure, and I just would have to speculate. In terms of what I've seen from Danny Ainge before, I still think he would go for Anthony Davis. I think he'd try to figure out something else at point guard. But whether it's Rozier or whether it's a trade for another guy, I think that they would still pursue Anthony Davis. I don't think that would necessarily change. I think this is a guy that Danny has wanted for years now and has anticipated him coming available. And now that he is available, I don't think he's going to miss the chance to try to get him, even if Davis doesn't commit to staying. I think that there's been sort of a recent trend, and hey, maybe you take these chances, and Kawhi Leonard being a good example with the Raptors, of course, Paul George staying with Oklahoma City. So, I think there is sort of something there where you can say, okay, we can get him into Boston and convince him to stay, once he's here.
Well, and that was the approach with Kyrie Irving, and we'll find out whether or not, the 2-year sample size was enough. But I guess that's that's what a lot of people come back to when it is Davis. If he won't give you that, even that wink, wink, nudge, nudge, I'm going to stick around, and I don't think he will, how aggressive is Ainge willing to get to gamble on a flight risk, effectively?
Yeah, I think he'll still be pretty aggressive. Again, I go back to Kevin Garnett didn't necessarily want to be in Boston, and certainly fought that initially when those trades first came up. I guess it's been 12 years now. So
it's crazy.
When those trade possibilities first came up, that he wanted no part of it, and I think that experience will kind of has stuck with Ainge and will kind of guide him as he continues to pursue Anthony Davis, because I think it's much the same thing. I think he's going to be trying to persuade a guy who doesn't necessarily want to be there to stay, and I think that's how he's going to view it. Is this is a guy who is an elite player and can help us win a championship. Let's get him, and then we'll worry about everything else after that.
More on Anthony Davis for a moment, because reportedly still wants out of New Orleans, even after a first chat with GM David Griffin, his agent Rich Paul. The dialogue is going to continue. Personally, I'm not alone. I might be in a minority. I could see AD staying put at least until the trade deadline to give this a shot with Zion Williamson and give it a shot with David Griffin and see if there's anything there. But again, I know a lot of people, and the reports from Shams and others are that he's still looking to move on. So Celtics, Lakers, Knicks, others are interested. You've already mentioned the fact that you expect Danny Ainge to be aggressive. Griffin has been vocal about wanting to keep Davis, and why wouldn't he? How do you think this ultimately does play out?
I think that ultimately he winds up getting traded. And I think what David Griffin's doing is the smart thing, because you are sort of keeping up some sort of trade value by saying we want to keep this guy. This isn't somebody we're desperate to trade. So I think that's step one. Step two is for him, you want to repair the relationship with Rich Paul, which obviously the organization that was torn apart this year, and whatever happens, you might need Rich Paul down the road, and David Griffin has a relationship going back to when LeBron was in Cleveland and David Griffin was in Cleveland. So I think that's the other reason you see David Griffin doing this. But I think he knows that he's got to trade him. But this is good PR, and it's good for sort of mending fences, and it's good to kind of get everybody back on the same page and make this a positive thing rather than an adversarial thing. So I think that's what David Griffin's doing, but he still knows he's got to trade the guy, and you don't want to wait till February, because you're not going to get the same return. So I think that he's kind of going through some kabuki theater here that is still going to wind up in the same place, and that is trying to find the right offer. He doesn't want to trade him in the Western Conference, and I don't know how hard he's going to hold on to that, because he might have to let that go. If the Lakers make the best offer, if another team, a dark horse team, and this is something that I've heard as well, that maybe Denver gets involved and like I say, looks at what Kawhi Leonard is doing and says, he could be our Kawhi Leonard, and it might be just 1 year, but you look at that Denver team, you put Anthony Davis on it with Jokic, and you have to trade either Harris or Murray, but when you start putting that together, you can see where that could be a contender right there. So you could see a dark horse involved with that as well. I think that there are going to be some different possibilities. Brooklyn has come up. I think that that's a real possibility as well. But I think that this trade happens this summer. Whatever it winds up being, it's going to happen this summer. This is not something that the Pelicans want to have drag into next year. I just think that would be too much. You're going to have Zion Williamson coming in here. You want to have some good feeling, starting out next year, starting out the Zion Williamson era, and you don't want it to start with this Anthony Davis cloud sort of hanging over the franchise.
Well, we both have kids. Let's play a little game of connect the dots here. You've already said then that you think Danny Ainge is going to go balls to the wall to get him, and you just said you think he's going to be traded. Does that mean ultimately you believe Anthony Davis will be a Celtic next year?
I still think that's how it goes. I still think that they are going to determine that they'll have a chance to re-sign him The stories about him not wanting to be in Boston were more about the agent wanting him to be in L.A. So I think that's what that's more about. And again, I hate to keep coming back to the Kawhi Leonard example, but the notion that he didn't want to be in Toronto mostly came from the agent as well. I mean, look, he could still sign with the Clippers or Lakers this summer, but it was mostly agent driven. That the agent wanted him in L.A. So this could be the same thing that once it becomes the player's decision, all of a sudden, I kind of like it here. I don't want to leave. So I think that's the chance that Danny Ainge is going to take. And like I say, I think he's been aggressive with this kind of thing before, and I would expect him to continue to be aggressive. And I think I think they can put together the best package, and I think Davis winds up in Boston.
Music to a lot of people's ears. I know that. I'll be fascinated to see how all that plays out. I feel like I keep using that word, but it's exactly what this offseason is. In the spirit of talking guard, Sean, because so much of the offseason conversation for the Celtics does surround the point guard position, whether it's Irving, whether it's Rozier. I've had a lot of people ask me, and this includes at DT Faraday on Twitter, is Danny Ainge going to bring Isaiah Thomas back next season?
I'd be really surprised if he did. I know everything's been smoothed over publicly. I think there's still a lot of bitterness there on Thomas's part. Look, he's going to be in a position where he'll have to take the best contract he could get. That's just what his situation is now. So if the Celtics wanted to bring him back, certainly they could. But I just don't think that's something that he wants to necessarily revisit. And I do think he'll get some other offers that, especially if Kyrie walks and there is a spot open, I think he'd have to understand that his role is not going to be what it was, and that's not necessarily the guy you want to play that role anyway. So, I think he'll wind up elsewhere. I think there is still a lot of bitterness on his part, and that he might get more opportunities as a featured player somewhere else. Whether it's in Orlando or someplace like that.
We'll get right back to Sean. Want to take a quick break. Tell you today's show is brought to you by BetOnline.ag. NBA playoffs coming to a close. NBA Finals a game in, and maybe a long way to go if the Raptors can actually continue this fight. Last chance for you to make some money on actual NBA games. And as we record right now, the Warriors minus 275 to win the Finals. Toronto had some moments in Game 1. We know that. Can they pull it off? The Raptors? Well, great value right now at plus 230. BetOnline.ag also has fun player props. I think Toronto can hold Curry under 42% from three, for instance. Well, that bet is minus 110. So go to clnsmedia.com/CelticsBeat. Get a 50% bonus when you sign up and use the promo code CLNS50. Don't be left on the sidelines with all this excitement going on the court, all right? Plus, you can play in BetOnline's virtual casino. You can make some money there, too. You always have futures bets you can play. MLB season, that is in full swing. NFL futures are already out. NHL playoffs, too. Stanley Cup, and we know, Bruins, Blues. Let's see what happens there. There's a lot going on, as there always is in the sporting world. Whatever you do, make sure you use betonline.ag and use the promo code CLNS50 for a 50% bonus on your first deposit. Just go to clnsmedia.com/CelticsBeat. This right here, it's going to be a big talking point. It already is, frankly, from at bleed_green_17. I saw the Celtics have been in contact with the Rockets. What do you think about the idea of doing a sign and trade of Al Horford for Clint Capella, then being part of a deal for AD? This question gets a little cumbersome, but at the core of it, Sean, this is what people are talking about. It's Daryl Morey, as I mentioned off the top of the show, wants to blow this thing up in Houston, potentially anyway, because he's tired of getting knocked out by the Warriors in the conference finals, which has happened a couple of times, and their season's been ended a few times by Golden State. And so Morey, I don't think James Harden's going anywhere. That would shock me. I really don't think Chris Paul's going anywhere because that contract is an albatross. It's 3 years, $124 million left. He's, 33, 34 years old. He struggles to stay healthy. I think Morey would be exceptionally fortunate to be able to get that contract off the books. But a guy, probably the guy, who is really appealing for Houston is Clint Capella. He's only a year into a 5-year, $90 million deal. He's young, I think 25 years old. We know he's a very, very good player, and that's the guy that most teams, including potentially the Celtics, if in fact they have been in touch, would be targeting, I would think. Not that Ainge for fun probably wouldn't ask about James Harden, but what do you think the likelihood is here that Danny Ainge is targeting anybody specific on that roster?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to look at Capella. Certainly, if you're trying to put together a package that meets what Houston wants, which is to make it more competitive in the short term with James Harden, try to get the most they can out of his prime years, then certainly a deal involving Capella and Al Horford makes some sense for both sides. Certainly if you get Eric Gordon in the deal, that would be terrific too. But that's I think with Capella, they're probably looking for multiple assets. They're looking for draft picks for sure. So the Celtics would have to include something along those lines. But I think that they're looking for multiple assets who can fill out that roster a little bit as well. So to have to put together a package that would pretty much only bring back Al Horford and a draft pick, just the way the numbers line up, that I think would be tough. They'd have to maybe find a third team or something else to make that work. But certainly Capella is, as far as being a pick and roll center, a guy who can finish around the rim, a guy who knows what his role is and could be effective defensively. He's a guy who you'd have to like. If you're Danny Ainge, but I just don't think that's high up on the list right now. I just think that we talked about Anthony Davis, and I still think that's the priority. And if they have to turn to something like a Capella trade, then they would. But there's going to be time for that. This stuff with Daryl Morey and the Rockets and what he's trying to do with that roster is probably going to play out after the draft. I'd be surprised if that any of that really went down before the draft. I think that's going to be something that kind of comes after that first wave of free agency, when you have teams kind of, the dust is settling and you're kind of counting what you got and what you still need, and then you go to the Rockets and you look to make a trade at that point.
I wonder this every year, and it gets talked about every offseason, just the timeline of events of the NBA calendar, and it seems especially noteworthy this year. I've heard, for instance, I think it was Jackie McMullen mentioned on a podcast. She said, I wonder if Kyrie Irving, if he decides he's leaving, and hopefully that's not the case, but if he decides he's leaving, would he be so inclined to tell Danny Ainge ahead of the draft so that Ainge, whether it's with draft picks and making a trade or whether it's just his strategy in the draft itself, however you want to shake it out, it may alter things, obviously, because as we know, I mean, not a lot of trades happen involving draft picks after the draft. It almost never happens, at least not with significant draft picks. It's always that either leading up to it or more typically in the NBA on draft night. And so do you think that again, the NBA calendar of the draft being June 20th and 10 days later free agency begins, and with Kyrie being such a domino and Anthony Davis being able to be acquired by Boston come June 30th, July 1st, whatever it technically is, that this is going to hamstring Ainge at all?
Yeah, and they have been. I have talked to people who say that they have been poking around about they've got 14, 20, and 22 about trying to maybe consolidate those picks into a pick for next year. The thinking being then they'll know whether they basically trying to punt on these picks.
Well, and they don't need to add 3 first rounders to this roster.
Right. But they might need to next year.
Right.
So the idea is, if you can package them with the team. Problem is that this isn't a great draft. It's not a terribly deep draft, and so there aren't a lot of teams clamoring for number 20 and number 22, especially if you're thinking that you're going to be a lottery team next year. That's not necessarily something that a lot of teams are going to do. But certainly that's something that the Celtics have explored is can we consolidate some of these picks into a pick next year when we'll have a better idea what's going on, when if we need to make a trade, where if we're going to make an Anthony Davis trade, then we have a pick next year we can offer rather than having to draft players this year and then trade them after the draft. That's something that they've certainly looked at. But you're right. The timing and the schedule of of things. And I've heard people suggest that they should have the draft after free agency. That the draft should come, in July, and certainly that makes some sense as well. But yeah, it's definitely something that is a challenge for the Celtics right now, and that they're trying to figure out exactly how to navigate that, because they might be in a position, like you say, where you're drafting players that you intend to trade, and you're just going to guess who the other team that you're going to make a trade with might want, and that's an uncomfortable position to be in.
I'd alluded to this a little bit before in talking about the Rockets, and as I already said, I think the idea is asinine, but I'll ask the question in the event that you happen to have a different opinion. This one comes from Sailboat Studios. Is it smart to trade for Chris Paul if Kyrie leaves?
No, for the reasons you said. I mean, he's missed. The problem is, all right, he's missed 20 games 3 years in a row. And that you'd say, oh, geez, that's bad, right? But then you look, and one part of that, he missed a bunch of games. He had that thumb injury. That was like 3 years ago when he was in L.A. But other than that, the thing that bothers me is that he's had a left hamstring injury, a significant left hamstring injury every year for the last 3 years. That was his main injury this year that kept him out I think it kept him out 17 games this year. Now that's a problem. That's a sign that this isn't something that is a fluke injury. You twist your ankle, that happens. Or Kevin Durant's got the calf strain, whatever, that happens. But a hamstring injury that you keep hurting 3 years in a row that causes you to miss significant time, that to me says you're getting old. Things are catching up to you. Certainly his numbers, you can look at his numbers. His pick and roll numbers were way down this year. He's usually in the 90th percentile in terms of his efficiency on the pick and roll. He was 59th percentile this year. So I mean, he's just the age is just too stark what's happening in terms of his age. He's turned 33, and a lot of guys have found ways to get around that. LeBron and you go back to Paul Pierce and Kevin Garnett. They found ways to play longer than players usually do in the NBA. But 32, 33 is usually, especially for point guards, that's when things start to fall apart. And you can see that happening with Chris Paul. You throw in, as you said, the $120 million contract. You just don't want any piece of that.
This question gives me a headache, but it's all over social media, and I'm not even calling out the particular user. I appreciate the question from NE2K18. It's just the notion that it's out there bothers me, and what I'm getting at here is Bruce Cassidy and the Bruins, they're in the Stanley Cup final, maybe a third champ in town when all is said and done. Bill Belichick, we know what he's accomplished. Alex Cora, Red Sox are slowly getting back on track, but a franchise year in year one as a major league manager, 108 wins, they win the World Series. So in the company of that, all that achievement, and the Celtics vastly underachieving this past year, suddenly Brad Stevens sucks. That's it's the what have you done for me lately, and people forget about the win total improving each of his first 6 years in the NBA and over 50 wins on a couple occasions, conference finals trips multiple times. It's people only think about the fact that he had his most talented roster that he's ever had, didn't get nearly enough out of them. Kyrie may bolt. They bow out in a lifeless effort against the Milwaukee Bucks. And it's, oh my God, how long is this guy going to be around? So the question is, how long do you think we stick with Brad Stevens if the next 3 years we don't reach the finals?
I mean, if the finals are your goal, then it's kind of tough because we don't know what's going to happen. I mean, you don't know what kind of team he's going to be given. We don't know who's going to make what decisions in free agency. So we don't know exactly what he's going to be working with. But yeah, 3 more years after he's been here, 6 years? So, if 9 seasons. It might be time after 9 seasons for sure, but you just don't know what's going to happen. I mean, you don't know what kind of teams he's going to have. He's certainly proven as an X's and O's coach, he's certainly proven to be among the best in the league. I think he needs to be better in terms of how he manages the locker room, in terms of having a grip on, if there's tension in there and how to diffuse it. Maybe he needs different assistant coaches who can do a better job of having a voice in the locker room. That was something that seemed to be lacking this year. I think there's certainly some things you'd like to see him get better at. But I just don't know. My question whenever somebody says, well, we should fire the coach is, okay, who are you going to bring in who's going to make things different? And I think that you can say that with Brad is all right. Who was going to do a better job with this team than what Brad did? I don't think there's any coach out there that was going to get Kyrie Irving to get along with the young guys, that was going to get more of a bridge to that locker room when it really needed it. I just don't see that there was anybody out there who was going to do a better job with this team. So I don't really buy all that. But yeah, sure. I mean, if you want to pick a number of years and say if they're not in the finals, I think in the end, look. Coaches who are around more than 5 years, that's a blessing in itself. That's not something you see very often. But yeah, if you give Brad another 3 years or so and he hasn't made the finals, then yeah, you'll probably be looking at a change at that point. But it's a weirdly hypothetical question because you just don't know what's going to happen between now and then.
Isn't it especially? This is kind of just occurring to me. Maybe it's been talked about elsewhere, but isn't it especially a hypothetical when it comes to the Celtics too? Because sure, I mean, to wonder what happens 3 years from now, who knows? And like you said, the roster will look how it looks, and maybe there's another rebuild coming, or maybe they're going to be right there in the mix for a championship next year. We just don't know. It's a fascinating offseason. But where I was going with that is, Danny Ainge has been around since 2003, I believe it is. He's great. He's made multiple tremendous trades. He really, I would argue, hasn't lost a trade since the Kendrick Perkins, Jeff Green deal, and even he still defends that one to this day, and some other people do as well. He's guided this organization through multiple very challenging rebuilds to get them in a position to potentially compete for championships. They win one, they bow out after blowing a 3-2 lead in another one, again, multiple trips to the conference finals, but again, we're talking about 16 years or whatever it is, one championship. Wyc Grousbeck loves him. Wyc loves Brad. Danny loves Brad. Doc, I don't believe, was going anywhere by the organization's choosing. I think he, as we know, he had to force his way out in order to leave. Otherwise, I think he would probably still be here because they love Doc. And so it seems like the Celtics are particularly slow when it comes to making a change of that magnitude. Like something has to really go wrong.
I would agree with you. Yeah, that they have not been an organization, and I understand that folks are frustrated with Brad. And like I say, I think there's things. I thought he could have played some of the young guys more throughout, during the season, just to give them some more. There's all kinds of things you could kind of poke at, but they've been very hands off and very big picture. And I think that's what you want from an owner, and because of that, you allow the people under you to do their jobs, and if you want, call up a Suns fan. If you're going to complain about Brad Stevens, call up a Suns fan and ask what it's like to be a fan of that organization that changes coaches when the wind blows. You really don't want that.
No, you want continuity.
Yeah, exactly. It's very frustrating. You don't know what to expect. Free agents don't necessarily like that because they don't know what they're getting into. You might sign on because you like a coach, and then he's fired by mid-season. If the general managers are changing, then you're constantly having different 5-year plans. The Celtics have a lot of stability, and that's a very, very good thing. And I don't think that's something that they particularly like to mess with. You're right. That ownership group has done a terrific job in terms of let's hire some good people and let them do their jobs. A lot of owners don't do that, and like I say, call some of those fans and ask them if they would rather have the Celtics situation or the situation that you see in places like Phoenix, for example,
or hell, the Lakers situation. I mean, take another premier franchise, and that's a whole other ball of wax. And they've got arguably, I mean, maybe not still today, but one of, anyway, the best players in the world, and they still are a complete train wreck.
And they have every advantage too, Adam. I mean, they have the best.
They're Hollywood, the weather.
I mean, they have a $30 billion TV deal. The regional TV deal is a $30 billion deal. They've got Hollywood. They've got the weather. They've got the Staples Center. They've got history. They have so many advantages. And look what they are. So I mean, you do have to appreciate the stability, even if you have problems with what Brad Stevens has done here or there. Keep it in perspective. That would be my advice.
This is a very different gear, but from Nico Ray 79, we mentioned the NBA draft is June 20th. Seas, as you said, they're scheduled to pick at 14, 20, and 22, and then 51 in the second round. A lot can change. I think it probably will. I agree with you on that. The question, though, that Nico wants to know, and I suspect others as well, who could you see the Celtics drafting at 14? Have you started to take a good look at that?
Yeah, certainly I think if the kid from France is there, Doumbouya, I think that he would be and not necessarily as a draft and stash. I don't think he wants to be stashed. I think he wants to come over. So I think if he's there, he's certainly a fascinating prospect. He's got a lot of work that is required, but he would be a risk worth taking. I think if Bol is still there, basically a top 5 pick who you're going to have to worry about an awful lot with this foot injury. But if you're the Celtics with their position, if you can get a top 5 talent with the number 14 pick, and just see. I mean, if it doesn't work out, then okay. But to me, it's a risk worth taking. So somebody like that, I think there'll be somebody who kind of slips, who maybe isn't expected to still be there. And I think the Celtics will be in a pretty good position at 14 to take advantage of that. So yeah, I think that you can pick up a pretty good player there. It just depends. It depends on sort of how things play out in the picks, whether somebody else drops. Basically, if there's somebody else that we're not, Nasir Little or somebody like that, there's definitely some possibilities that somebody we're not expecting winds up being there at 14, and the Celtics can take advantage of that.
Interesting question, and this one is more Boston focused, and I don't mean the Celtics. I mean Boston, the fan base, the city, and you happen to be you're a Boston guy, even though obviously you cover the league on a broad scope. But this person from Calling You Out 81, how much do you think the success of the other local franchises, and again, potentially 3 championships in the span of months, it's ridiculous, has given fans a sense of entitlement? Because it seems that not long ago, this Celtics team was just rebuilding.
I mean, and rebuilding usually, look, if you can rebuild to multiple Eastern Conference Finals appearances as they got, that's pretty good, and that's something that is hard to do. The NBA is such a hard league to rebuild in because if you don't have one of the top 10 players, you're really in a tough position, and so the fact that they've been able to rebuild and make themselves a contender Obviously they had a lot of help from Billy King and the Nets, and that is, I'm sure, much appreciated. But even with that, they still had to get those picks right, and there were a lot of questions about when they drafted Jaylen Brown, for instance, when they drafted Marcus Smart. You can go back and a lot of the things that have worked out for them didn't have to work out, and with some teams, again, I hate to keep picking on Phoenix, but look at they've always seemed to be picking around where the Celtics were picking, and the Celtics always seem to get the player who worked out, and the Suns got the player who didn't. And so this can all go very, very badly. So the fact that the Celtics are where they are is something that you really do have to appreciate. Don't forget that, look, before they signed Al Horford, and you remember this, Adam, and I think a lot of people forget it. The question was, would any free agent ever sign in Boston? And I remember everybody asking that question. Why won't free agents sign in Boston? It's because it's hard. It's because it's hard to sign max free agents. There's not a lot of them, and if your team's no good, then those guys aren't going to want to go there. It's that simple. And so the fact that the Celtics are a team that free agents would go to, that they then signed Gordon Hayward, that's something that you've got to appreciate, because it wasn't that way for a long, long time, and it can very easily go back to not being that way. So the fact that they are where they are, I think you're right. Even though they haven't won the championship here with this group, it's still something you have to appreciate where they are.
Well, with the entitlement angle, there is an element of keeping up with the Joneses and what have you done for me lately, like we talked about before. And the Celtics, I think, have just been known historically, the fan base has been known as this kind of the whole green teamer thing, which is viewed really as more of an insult than it is a compliment, where you're just sort of happy to be here and nothing's really a problem and everything's good. But then you start to see other organizations, all of them around you, winning, and then you're underachieving, and there's nobody by your side that's taking some of the focus off of you, and you do finally get some of those star players, and they don't, for one reason or another, live up to whatever the expectation is. Like even Al Horford, and I am someone who appreciates Al Horford, as a lot of people do, but there are plenty of people that will never think that he's worth what they paid him, because that definition of a max player, that 20 and 10 or whatever, like that's never been Al Horford. But people expect money to correlate to certain statistics versus the other intangibles or little things or whatever. And then Gordon Hayward, people look at as overpaid, as opposed to Celtics doing what they had to do, which was market value. And nobody even really remembers what he looked like in Utah around here, because people weren't watching those games out west. They only see the guy who went down 5 minutes into his Celtics career and has not been the same player since, and they wonder if he ever will be. And, of course, you get a guy in like Kyrie Irving, and then he's, I don't know, it's too strong to say malcontent, but moody, and is he going to stick around? And so I think there is, what we know, there's a sense of entitlement among fans, because fans just around here over the last 2 decades accept nothing less than winning, and I think that's a good thing, ultimately, but it also can lead to being a little bit delusional and overly arrogant.
Yeah. Right. And I think what happens is that if you put the Celtics in the context of the other teams in Boston, that's one thing, but it's also not fair. You got to put them in the context of the rest of the NBA. And if you want to be, the Charlotte Hornets, or you want to be, a team that can sort of scrape and win 42 games and get to the playoffs and get knocked out in the first round and then run it back next year and do the same thing and just kind of keep beating your head against the wall. There's a lot of NBA teams that are in that position that have to do it that way because they haven't had some of the breaks the Celtics have. They haven't had some of the good moves that the Celtics have made. So you really got to put it into that context. It's when you look at the NBA, like I say, it's so hard to get hold of the star players that you need to make you a contender. And I understand that this was a disappointing season for the Celtics, and because of that, there's certainly reason to question what's happened and to compare them to the other teams that have come through with championships, or at least the finals appearance now for the Bruins. It's really unfair to do that, though, because it's just it's much harder in the NBA. There's just so few players, and the fact that the Celtics have some of them, is sort of a victory in itself.
I love that mentality of like, yeah, we want star players, but no, we don't want that star player. We want that star player, which is, you get a lot of in Boston. So one thing that is also very, very interesting and more compelling this year than it has been the last handful, because we finally have some new blood. NBA Finals is underway, Sean, and, congrats to the Raptors for taking Game 1. They did it without Kevin Durant on the other side. I figured the Warriors would still win, even without Kevin Durant on the floor, and I think that even when he does return, that they're going to get back on track before that mid-series point. They'll probably take the second game and they will win this series. But just the fact that they're on their heels even a little bit is good for the finals. It's probably good for the Warriors in some ways. It's definitely good for the Raptors and for the NBA and for ratings and all of that stuff. And for viewers, for fans that want to see an interesting NBA Finals against a super team, with Toronto being on the map here for really the first time. But here's the question. What's better for the Celtics, the Raptors winning or losing in the finals?
If the goal is to have Kawhi Leonard land elsewhere, I'm not sure it matters. I think that whatever he's going to do at this point, look, if they had gone out in the second round against Philadelphia, which they very nearly did, if Joel Embiid had been healthy, that might well have been what happened. But then we're talking about something that might have affected his decision. I think being in the finals with this team, win or lose, is probably going to have the same impact on his decision. But
I agree with you.
Certainly you really do want to have to increase the chances that you possibly have for him leaving Toronto. I think that them losing, if they win, I think it'd be a little harder for him. I've heard the opposite mindset that, well, hey, I won you a championship, now I'm going where I really want to be in L.A.
Yeah, that's the side I would take it from.
I don't know. Players get greedy. I think if they win one, he would want to come back. I think that the Warriors winning would probably be best for the Celtics. I think that's probably that's probably best in terms of that dynamic playing out.
Well, I guess the other side of the question is, that's specific to the Raptors, or at least, your answer was specific to the Raptors and Kawhi. But, the other half of the what's better for the Celtics is the Warriors' future. Does them winning or losing impact Kevin Durant's future, Klay Thompson's future, how the makeup of that team continues, win or lose in the finals right here?
No, I don't think that the result of this finals is going to have any. I think Klay Thompson stays and Kevin Durant goes. I think if they had lost, if they had been swept in the first round, that would have been the case. I think Durant has pretty much made up his mind. Certainly, folks in Golden State have sort of gotten used to that fact or accepted that fact. That they're just sort of expecting him to leave. He doesn't seem very happy. He hasn't been very happy all year, and you can maybe argue since even before that. He talked about regretting the decision pretty quickly. When he saw all the hatred directed toward him. So I think that he was always going to leave at this point and go and try to build a team himself. Now, whether they win or lose has no impact on whether he winds up with the Clippers or whether he winds up with the Knicks. I don't think that really that decision is going to be made afterwards. But yeah, I'm not sure that really anything that could happen in these playoffs was going to change Kevin Durant's mind in terms of whether he comes or whether he goes.
Well, maybe I'm remembering this wrong. Didn't he re-sign a shorter-term deal after he had already been there?
Yes, right.
So he couldn't have.
I think he was always going to try to, win 3 championships.
Sure.
I think there was always going to be a limited amount of time in which he was going to stay at Golden State, win as much as he can, and then go on into something else. There's too many personality clashes going on in that locker room.
Yeah, which is, remarkable they're able to have the success that they are in spite of all that. And, of course, talent has a great deal to do with that. And the Celtics, while very talented, didn't have that level of talent. So I guess we'll kind of go full circle here and wrap it up with this because it's a popular question and has been for many months. Assuming Durant does leave, and you mentioned the Knicks, Clippers as well, but more so the Knicks, does his decision ultimately tie into Kyrie Irving, or are they not so close that Irving is he's going to do whatever's best for him, and that if that happens to be with Durant, then wonderful, and if it doesn't, it doesn't? Yeah,
I think obviously if he goes to New York, if Kyrie were to go to New York, he would need somebody else to go with. You can't. That franchise just has nothing in the cupboard right now. So they would have to bring in somebody else. And it's always been Durant has been the rumored guy. So if Durant winds up with the Clippers, I think that does change Kyrie's thinking, whether it's to stay with the Celtics or perhaps go to the Nets. That's another possibility for him. So, I think that Durant's decision will weigh on what Kyrie does, but I'm not sure it weighs on whether he leaves or not. It's gonna weigh on where he goes if he does leave. So I think if he's going to leave, he's going to make that decision. But once he leaves, where he goes to, that's gonna depend in part on Durant, in part on I don't really buy the whole Lakers thing, but certainly it's out there. It's a possibility. It could happen, but I think the Nets would probably be option number 2 for him.
Huge month for the NBA, gigantic month for the Celtics, and an awfully big month maybe for another star free agent, Sean Deveney. Looking forward to seeing where you wind up, my friend. I have no doubt it's going to happen very quickly, though, and I always appreciate you hopping on with me.
All right, thank you, Adam.
As usual, and to no surprise, great stuff from Sean. Always love having him on. A lot of great insights. Someone who's clearly very well connected around the NBA, and it's going to be, I've said it a billion times over, it's going to be very, very interesting what happens in the coming weeks. And stay with Celtics Beat because we are going to be right there for you, maybe with some special treats coming up along the way. A couple things in the works. We'll see what pans out. I don't want to give anything away in the event that nothing works out, and then I've got empty promises. So we'll see what happens and, where things go, obviously, as it concerns both this show and some fun guests and more so the things that we will have to talk about. We're off to a rip-roaring start this offseason already. And if you've missed any past recent shows that are still, of course, immensely relevant since the end of the Celtics season anyway, I encourage you to go back and listen because I can only tweet so much, believe it or not, and there are just so many good things to come out of those shows that I would think you'd want to go back and listen to as a fan of the Celtics and just gaining knowledge and insights into all the different things that Danny Ainge is facing and may do and behind-the-scenes chatter that has been unearthed on this show. We are brought to you by betonline.ag. Go to clnsmedia.com/CelticsBeat. Use the promo code CLNS50 for a 50% bonus on your first deposit. Thanks again to Sean, my producer Evan Valenti. Thanks to Nick, Larry, John, everybody at CLNS Media, and of course, you. We welcome your feedback. You can get me on Twitter at Adam M. Kaufman. If you like the shows, and I hope you do, and you want more, leave us ratings, leave us reviews on iTunes. Just search Celtics or Celtics Beat. You'll find us, I promise. Everything makes a big difference, no matter how silly that may sound. So subscribe, and show releases will continue each and every Sunday throughout the offseason. As breaking news happens, we'll be right there to react to it, maybe break some stuff along the way if we're fortunate as well. I'm Adam. Happy June. Happy summer. Enjoy some nice weather.
Hello, I'm Dan Lothian, host of the Behind the Media podcast on the CLNS Media Network. Along with Jimmy Young, we dive into the biggest media headlines each week with honest, informed, and sometimes irreverent perspectives. It's not all serious. We deliver information and entertainment. As we like to say on Behind the Media, we find the interesting in media so you don't have to go searching for it. Listen to our podcast and get prepped for the next trip to the water cooler. Subscribe to Behind the Media wherever you get your podcast, or find us on www.clnsmedia.com.